The more I go on like that, the more she feels like, oh my God, something big is coming. Because no matter what our relationship language, the person hearing something like that has a butt detector that can hear the butt coming around the mountain like a train. Like, the longer Dad, quote Dad, says all these loving things to me, the more likely he is to not only be saying a butt, but it's got to be a big butt. And what did I do wrong? And so even the most wonderful relationship language does not provide a safe environment for the person to hear a concern of someone they love, which they consider a criticism. You've heard me using the word criticism throughout our talk here, and sometimes people will say, well, why call it a criticism? Why not call it a concern? And one of the distinctions I make is that any person who has a feeling of wanting something from their partner to change, they will usually feel that they're not criticizing. They'll feel like they're making a suggestion for improvement. And because they know historically that people don't always take suggestions well, they'll think of themselves as courageous for even bringing the suggestion for improvement up. But there's on some level, unconsciously or whatever, they feel like, gee, when I make a suggestion for improvement at work, I might be called a consultant and paid for it. But I make that same suggestion or a parallel suggestion for improvement in my relationship with my husband or wife, and they get defensive, and so I get criticized for my criticism. But I'm not criticizing, I'm making a suggestion for improvement. Well, almost everybody who perceives themselves, who does something like that, perceives themselves as an enhancer and as an improver, whereas the person who is hearing their partner make a suggestion for improvement is almost always feeling criticized if there's any request for a change in attitude or any request for a change in behavior. So one of the things that has to happen at the beginning is to recognize this constant difference between the perception of the criticizer and the perception of the criticized. So I often use words like criticizer because I'm preparing a person to get to feel safe inside of themselves for what their experience is of the suggestion for improvement.
Mm. And you mentioned perception, and I always find it fascinating that you can take 5 kids in the same environment and they each have a different perception of what actually transpired.
Yes, and this is something that we really have to remember at every level. So once I get the couple to hear what their partner's story is and create safety inside of themselves so that they know that the love of their partner is going to increase when they feel completely heard. At the end of that process, virtually every person in the group says, I said the same thing to my wife or husband before, or my partner before, or my daughter or son before. But for the first time, I really felt like they wanted to hear me, that they felt that they weren't closing off to me. I felt more heard than I've ever felt before, even though I've said pretty much the same thing before. And so, but then, so they're sitting there feeling just so secure, so loved, so heard. And now I say, but you have just shared your story. Now it's your turn to listen to your partner's response to what you just shared. And so they're going, oh, no problem. And so, but before they listen to their partner's response, I have them meditate in those 6 mindsets that I train them to do. And they then, one of the things I do is hold up a piece of paper, a picture of a person that was taken at the exact same moment and the exact same time, the same person, but it's 4 different pictures of that person at that time. One done by a Picasso-like artist, another done by a photographer-type artist, and it's 4 different versions of that. And I said, now you're going to be experiencing your partner's story, and your partner's story will always be different than your story, even if it's a story about what time that you said you were going to be home on time for dinner, and you got home on time late, and and you'll have a different perception of what time you got home, what held you up, what the best and worst intent of that was, and that almost everybody sees even the same experience, the same event differently, and so, and especially the longer the time passes, memory experts tell us we adapt all the circumstances and the story to make ourselves feel better about ourselves. And this is why, if we apply this to everyday life, when we have Israelis and and Palestinians, we have men and women, parents and children, employers, employees, Republicans and Democrats, and everybody sees the world differently through that filter. And so one of the great contributions to peace in the world is teaching people how to hear the other person's story with the knowledge that when you do, it's very rare that people become violent against somebody by whom they feel understood. It's very rare that they sue somebody by whom they feel understood. It's very rare that they punch somebody who is making a real effort to understand them.
Right. Beautiful point. Yes. And it is, we are a fascinating species because we can judge someone without even knowing their story. And then after we hear the story, then that's when the compassion bubbles up. And,
yes, especially if we hear that story in a way that isn't feeling internally defensive or threatened while that story is being told.
Right. Compassion is such a huge feeling to have. I mean, it solves so many different things. Just to have compassion for someone maybe that has said things that have been hurtful, whatever, but you can, with that compassion, you can understand where they may be at that time and understand, as you say, and then move on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you enjoy working with younger couples or older?
I really get a lot of the same gratitude from pretty much everyone. I had quite an older woman in my workshop, last workshop I did, and she was talking about how she had just a real toxic relationship with her daughter-in-law, and she was in her 70s, and so but she was very and she went out and she used some of these techniques with her daughter-in-law of just listening and just being there for her. I teach people how to not just hear their partner, but I also teach people how to take the lessons of this workshop and apply it to somebody who has not attended the workshop, to do it as a one-way street. And so she took that and applied it to her daughter-in-law and just wrote me this beautiful, loving note about how this has totally changed her relationship with her daughter-in-law, and that she's no longer freezing her out and basically ostracizing her from the family, and instead she's sort of inviting her in because, in a sense, the woman who was saying this was, she was a very articulate, very bright woman. But the problem with people who are bright is that they're often able to use the intelligence like a sword to slice through the arguments of somebody else or the feelings of somebody else. And it's one of the reasons why we love our dogs so much, because they're criticizing us. So in exchange for that lack of criticism, we'll pick up their doo-doo and we'll feed them and give them free room and board, and take them for a walk, and bend our day to adapt to their needs because we are not being criticized.
Yeah, powerful. Yes. Well, we only have a couple minutes, but I wanted to mention, not that you would have time because you're doing so much work as it is, but this program and this work would be excellent to be facilitated in the prison system. Have you ever thought of that?
I have. In fact, I ran for governor of California in New York, some years ago, and went to spoke at some of the prisons. And my goodness, one of the things that just was very powerful to the prisoners was the learning, since 93% of the prisoners are males and a good percentage of them are fathers, and they had no idea how important fathers were to their sons and their daughters. And when they found it out, they were just like, many of them were literally in tears, and these are prisoners, and some of them are pretty tough characters. And they just said they never had any idea that their being a good dad would be helpful to their children, not making the mistakes that they made and how much they wanted to be. But one of the things that was common to a lot of the prisoners is that the moment they were criticized is that they would get furious, and what that indicates is that beneath that tough exterior, that mask, is oftentimes a very vulnerable, sensitive person who in no way wants to do wrong, but then becomes so angry and so violent at wanting to defend against being criticized that she or he, mostly he, becomes violent in the process.
Yeah. Wow.
So in brief, this process, I think, would be extremely valuable to be taken to prisoners, because they could probably benefit from it more than any other. And in a sense, part of the larger thing that I'm saying is that, in a sense, we're all prisoners of our need to be loved, approved of, heard, not criticized, and that
you're exactly right.
And so that, and that when we start to feel like, wow, when we allow the people we love and the people we don't love to share who they really are, and just take a few moments out to really get into their story non-defensively, and know underneath it all that the more we get into their story and the less defensive we are, the more we'll create a bond and a bridge that is just, that we rarely see these days among the extremes of political parties.
Beautifully said. Beautiful. And that's all we have. And everyone, first of all, thank you so much, Warren, for joining us again. And we'll have you back. And for everyone out there, stop and think, go within, and change things in your mind, and you can create a whole new reality based in love.
Are you seeking a clearer path to love? Then tune in to the Love by Intuition show next week. All designed to your highest good. To contact Deborah Buffet, owner of Empowered Connections, call her at 508-226-1723. That's 508-226-1723. Or link on to lovebyintuition.com. Remember, we are all one, and we are all part of the miracle of love.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.